Dr. Halleck. So good to see your faces. So as we get into this, one of the things I want to open with is I hope to provide maybe some structural tips and lessons that we have learned that'll be a little bit more block and tackle when it comes to what this looks like. We had a debate of whether we would be talking about quite literally leading virtual meetings, or whether we would go more meta. And I think it'll be a little bit of both probably, because I like also to say, like, tell me what to do, Rob. Give me some thoughts. But I'm going to give you my thoughts, and then as I walk through this content and you get into out to discuss this, I would suggest maybe take some notes. Something will grab you, something that seems like it's relevant to your experience, something you might apply, whatever that is. One thing I think that is interesting that our team has been talking about often with the groups that we work with is this question. Is our challenge with virtual leading virtually, really about the possibility that we were never doing it right in the first place? Is this something we're blaming on the technology that may have little to do with the technology, or maybe less than we're giving it credit for? So that's something to throw out there. I also, if you want, here's a little bit of fun. That was a little heavy. Here's something a little more fun. I dare you to put in the chat. What is one characteristic of the worst video meeting you've ever been a part of? So whatever you would say, that's kind of fun. I bet you'll have some ideas, because I've just heard a lot of people say, like, I'm in dumb meetings. I was with two different people who thought about leaving a team or a board they were on because of how poorly the meetings were run. So this is a big deal. This matters, like the way that we're structuring things. Here's what I also want to suggest to you that's kind of interesting. We do embrace new realities pretty quickly. Think about texting for just a moment. I'm old enough to remember when texting was new. And you think about it, I know all my friends, so many of them were saying, like, why would you write to each other when you could just call? My kids were laughing last night as I was thinking about that. They were like, why wouldn't you write to each other? And it's interesting how quickly that was embraced. But do you remember, any of you remember that? Give me a nod. You remember people saying, like, why would you do that? Why would you text people? But now it's so deeply embedded in our culture. And part of it's because you don't have to talk to me. You just get to write to me, and I don't get to respond, so we can do things maybe a little quicker. And then the email, okay, it's all these interesting things about how texting and email were related. It's kind of fascinating. I want to introduce one thing that I'm going to be talking through as well. I've always been fascinated by organizational culture. And one of the greatest thinkers in this space is a guy named Edgar Schein, who wrote a book called Leadership and Culture, which is fascinating because he made this linkage between leadership and what culture looks like. And he defined culture as this. I don't know why I memorized this, but it's as a system of shared values, beliefs, and assumptions that have, listen to this, that have worked well enough to be considered valid. So it's interesting. He's saying it's a system of shared values, beliefs, and assumptions that have worked well enough to be considered valid, and therefore get taught to new members as the appropriate way to feel, think, and behave in organizations. It's really interesting, right? It's a system of these values, beliefs, and assumptions. It works well enough, so we adopt it, like texting. It worked well enough for some reason. We may not have known why, but it started to work, and so then we teach it to everybody else. And I'm gonna use that as we think about what virtual culture looks like, what leading virtually looks like. So, and by the way, he uses a model of, I've always loved this, taught this for years to graduate students of culture, and he uses an iceberg. And you know that the fundamental characteristic of an iceberg that people think of is that most of it is underwater, 80 to 90% of it's underwater. And so when he uses that, he talks about stated values being the things or he talks about artifacts first, physical objects being important, that's the tip of the iceberg, thing we can see, get closer to the water, and he talks about stated values, so things we say are important. But his big statement was that most of what culture is about is underwater. They're what he calls assumptions, things that we don't actually write down, that we can't see, touch, or feel, but these are the things that drive that definition. Those shared things, most of it we can't see, which is why over the years, people, Dr. Halleck and me, have had a lot of work to do, because people just hire us to come in and look at the things that they can't see. It's what psychology is about, right? So here are some things. Let's just kind of get a little bit more lighthearted, but here are some things. What is different about leading in a virtual context? And I am going to have you think about leading, for example, using some sort of technology like we're using now. And most of you will understand these things. So here's some things. In most cases, you can wake up, roll over, and jump into work. I don't recommend it. My son said that, like he rolls over, he rolls out of bed and then just gets on a Zoom call for his classes. He's in college, he's a freshman right now. I don't recommend it. I'm like, dude, take a shower, do something for the sake of other people. We can wear different clothes. I've noticed that basketball coaches, have you seen this? These games are on national television. Why do they now think it's okay to wear a sweatsuit when they're coaching? I don't know what's changed. Like, they were still on national television. Look at coaches. They don't wear suits and ties anymore. What's happened? I bet they'll never go back. Just interesting. We can't talk over one another. That's interesting too. Like, the technology doesn't usually allow that, doesn't work very well. You've experienced that. You can oftentimes mute yourself or mute someone else. Fascinating. All right, I don't know what to do with that. I'm not going to mention differences in the impact of bodily functions, but Steve Fitch already did, so I'm not going to get any deeper into that. But you just read into that however you want. There's an impact of all kinds of things that we could talk about that we used to. I'm not going to go there. Okay, it's easier maybe to check out and hide in most cases, in most kinds of meetings. Here's another one, fake backgrounds. Interesting. What does that do in terms of assumptions? Coworkers in 2D. I saw Megan and Daniel on our team at a distance a few weeks ago, and we showed up, and it was the strangest thing to see Daniel Howick in three dimensions. I was literally like, kind of looking like, whoa, creepy. So just like, I don't know what that's doing. Here's what's also kind of interesting on this bottom of this. I wrote this down. Meetings were dumb before. Most meetings. If you don't believe me, go ask a guy named Patrick Lencioni, because he made a living off of a whole book about it. So it's like we all were a part of meetings that were a waste of time before. And for those of us, in some cases, maybe that's continued. I'm not saying all of our meetings were dumb, but this is things that are interesting, right? Now imagine this. What would the world been like right now if this had happened 20 years ago? 15 years ago. I don't even know what the timeline is. Before these technologies existed. If we'd had a global pandemic, I kind of think, some of you are like, holy cow, what would that have been like? And I kind of think maybe we would have just had other problems. It's, but it's interesting to think about how technology has allowed things that maybe we didn't have before. So let's get a little bit deeper now. Now I'm diving into, those are the things that we talk about and laugh about as we dig a little deeper into this iceberg, okay? Here's a few more things that may be different. Here's what's also different. We can see ourselves. Daniel already mentioned his example of him eating a burrito and never having seen himself eat a burrito in a meeting before. But that's a funny example. But think about it. What is it shifting when you can see yourself? Maybe it's actually increasing awareness in good ways, not just kind of silly ways. We don't mind if he eats a burrito. Actually, Daniel, it's not a big problem. Here's some other things. Over talkers tend to get checked now. If a Zoom or whatever it is, if it's a Teams meeting or whatever you're using, those people can still over talk, but it seems like it's a little bit easier if it's halfway managed well to check some of those people. We're face forward. Think about this. When I used to go to speak at a conference, everyone was facing me. Now you're all facing each other. This is my greatest dream. I used to make students sit in a circle. I would break all the chairs up and try to change the model. We're face forward. It's allowing for something. This is going to go a little deeper, and this is around some of the content in my book, Composed, but this is fascinating too. I'm finding this to be true. People who were peacekeepers, kind of over-connected emotionally to others, are actually able to be more differentiated, to be a little bit more healthy as leaders or participants in a team, because of the fact that this has kind of given them a barrier in some cases to the overstimulation of all the other people's voices that are around them. But I also think for people who are the other way, where they tend to be over convicted, like they just bring a lot of voice, they're not naturally connected emotionally. But for those people, there's a sense in which we worked with a lot of leaders who feel more disconnected. So I think that's another possibility. There's so many things on this list. I'm going to get to in just a moment. Oh my gosh, there's good stuff here. Oh, this is another interesting one. Is like, not all of us, many of us are leading in a hybrid kind of context where we're responsible for some people who are actually face-to-face and some people who are on Zoom. So has it increased some of the divisions that we see in our workforce? Is kind of fascinating as well, that I haven't heard talked about that much. And then finally, this is back to some fun things, and I want to get into a couple other things before I'm done, is this. Instead of us going to the wrong Starbucks, we show up in the wrong Zoom meeting. It's happened a few times to us, okay? Our bandwidth problem with Wi-Fi is kind of like we got stuck in traffic. So we're going to be, either way, we're going to be late for the meeting, right? But it's just a different problem that we're facing. So here are some things that I think also there's possibilities that have opened up that a lot of people haven't been thinking about, and some possibilities. So here's one example, is that our team, our WiLD Leaders team, can be in 3 cities in one day. It's been fascinating. Like one day, I think we were in New York, Orlando, and Los Angeles, and then back in Seattle. And it cost those leaders almost nothing because no one had to get on a plane. Kind of interesting. I think the face forward piece is a really fascinating thing that's opened up connections for us. People have asked us all the time on these Friday calls, how is it that I feel like these people are brothers and sisters in 10 minutes? And part of it's because of the architecture and being able to connect that way. There are all kinds of these. I think the interesting thing also is that the work-life disruption, or that balance issue, has become more of an issue of collision. Like, it's just here now. We got to figure it out. Like, it wasn't something we weren't dealing with. Well, am I going home or am I staying at the office? It's like, it's a little bit different now, as you know. These are all just realities, but what I want to get to is let's go at some meta. And I've got a bunch of P's here that I want to go through. So I love alliteration. So perspective, purpose, process, and people. Perspective, purpose, process, and people. Here's one thing. Let's start with perspective. Some of the challenges that we're facing, like I've said already, are no different. Mindset matters. I cannot tell you how many leaders that we are working with who have this belief that somehow leading virtually is dumb. I want it back. And I'll say this again at the end. One of my worst nightmares is that all this ends and all we do is we don't learn anything and we go back to the same way we were leading before. If we don't learn something this season about the opportunities that are there, that would be really problematic. And so understanding and thinking about the potential that's here is really, really important. And part of that is just changing our perspective. And so it's taking a moment to take stock of the opportunities that are here that we did not have before. And I've already mentioned some of those things, but you see opportunities as well. And that whole area of being in a growth mindset is critical in this, because it's like talking about Google Meets as like, I don't want to do that anymore and it's dumb, is the same way as a fixed mindset that says I'm either smart or I'm not. It's either dumb or it's not. Well, the reality is it has opened up possibilities for all of us if we just thought intentionally about what some of those possibilities are. One simply is we get to, I talked, it's kind of interesting. We don't dress for success now. Now we get to dress for who we are. I would suggest sometimes showering. It's just my suggestion, but I think sometimes that's important. But it's been interesting to think about changing our perspective, that our mindset about what virtual leading looks like is important. Because here's the other thing is that, do you know how much, these numbers are out there. You know how much money is being saved by organizations not having to fly people everywhere? And maybe there's opportunity there as we begin to figure out what virtual meetings, what virtual conferences, what all these things look like, instead of trying to force ourselves back into the old economic model, to say, what is it that we could do better? in this season. The second thing is this, and then I'm going to get in. I will get, some of you are like, give me some real things to hold on to, Rob. I'll get there. But the second thing is this. I said perspective. The second one is purpose. What we have found over and over again with leaders we're working at with in this context, when all this started, now we're deep into this kind of season. We don't know how deep it goes, but we could emerge, is that for organizations that lacked a clear purpose, Daniel and I talked about this over and over again, this season has shown our roots. If you didn't know why you're in it before, you probably are less sure now. And there's never been a more important season to get back to why. Every single time we do a meeting virtually, we did it this morning, our team gathers to say, why are we doing the WiLD conversation today? We think about who's coming and we think about why. That grounding purpose, and we have a ton of research that some of you heard about regarding how important that is as a strategic decision, is to think about why. Now, the third thing, so that's perspective, purpose, is process. And here's what I'm going to give you some of you are like, okay, give me some real things to hold on to, Rob. In terms of process, I'm going to let you under the hood of some of the things at WiLD Leaders. I'm not going to give you all the secret sauce, because then you wouldn't enjoy it as much as you do. But let me give you some things that some of you have experienced who've been a part of this. All right, finally, some of you are saying. Here's a couple of things. Do you know when Daniel does the rules of engagement? Mike McAvoy can give me, because I can see you on my screen, can give me a nod. You know what I'm talking about? At the beginning of every call, he does the rules of engagement. That's not just playing around. For us, that's critically important, that we set up this standard for how we're going to be together. And do you know why we repeat them every time? For some of you have been on this for months, a part of this conversation. Do you know why we won't stop, even though some of you are going, most of you wouldn't do this, but there's always one or two that would go like, well, why do you keep repeating those same things? Because you're not new. We are mindful of the possibility that there might be someone here today who's never before. And so the level set is one of our underlying values, is that someone who jumps in here will not be scared away because they're part of dumb Zoom calls or because they're more introverted. So setting those rules of engagement to give them some psychological safety to be here with an amazing group of leaders that we want them to lead is important. Another thing, the pre-show. Some of you have been there for the get here before 10. You know where we got that? Cirque du Soleil. Any of you been to Cirque du Soleil before? You ever been in and they start the show before the show starts? When this season started, we had a conversation. I've always been fascinated by how the clowns are in the audience before the show starts. So it's like, because of this, we realize that 10 seconds of silence feels like an eternity in a virtual meeting. That's why Dr. Halleck is an unbelievable MC. And I'm letting you under the hood. So no, don't start critiquing this now. You don't get permission to do that, because that'd be horrible. Well, Daniel, you could have been a better job of emceeing. But the point is this, is that silence is kind of has to be used very carefully in a Zoom context, but it is still an important tool. Another thing is this. Oh man, this is so important. You know how this is so important to our whole process, but our work together with our teams that we lead is not just about our systems for implementation and operations. It's not just for execution. It's not just for sales. It's not just for driving, for getting stuff done and producing this flyer or whatever the work is. It also needs, especially in this season, there's an opportunity to bring development alongside the rhythm of those operations. And so it's one of the reasons our team, we use the WiLD Toolkit as our way, it is wired into our meetings to once a month have a conversation together about our development that's right in the rhythm of our work together, so that we will see each other more effectively than we ever have before. Did you know that when Claire, some of you know Claire, when Claire Jenkins joined our team and we interviewed her, what was that? Claire was last January? I think we were only together 3 times before this happened. And it's given us, Daniel and me and the rest of our leadership team, a chance to know and see Claire by implementing a system for her development that we're also going through as well. Here's a bit of brain science that I think is fascinating as well, that we realize we kind of tripped into. If you read brain rules or any of the neuropsychology around meetings, that people can handle about, I think it's somewhere in the range of 12 minutes of content, 12 to 15 minutes of content before they need to process. And think about what we're doing today. It's kind of been this rhythm of letting people process together has been such a tremendous thing. And I'll tell you one last thing on this, that I think this is something that some of you could think about implementing to run meetings better, is that every one of our meetings, most all of them, not every time, but most all of them, have a producer, an MC, you can call it whatever you want, and a content owner. It is very difficult to hold content and to hold group facilitation and going well in the same time. And so I'm not saying you have to resource it the way we have done that, but I think you may have someone on your team who is an incredible MC or holder of meetings or structure. You may have someone else who actually who would love to understand the technology, who would love to actually be taking notes in real time. That's another thing that's opened up, is if you watch Claire, she's probably taking notes right now as I'm talking. I don't know, but maybe Jim or Jay, I see her there. You're like, give me a nod if you've seen some Claire notes come into the chat. Like, when have you had someone take notes for you? Unbelievable, right? It's so cool. And there's just some of the things that could open up. And then my final P is people. Is that ultimately, this has always been about human beings. Leading virtually has always been about the people. And this is where that whole concept of why we're here together, about whole and intentional leader development, is dreaming up ways with the technology we have for the time that we're using it, even when we go back hybrid, how can we use this more effectively to see people and to also help people move forward and perform well? What would that look like to do that? Because ultimately this is about human beings bringing their whole story to their work. And what an unbelievable opportunity we have in this season to do that. So excited for you to jump out into a conversation together at this moment. So Dr. Halleck.
And Steve, it's been fun to get to know you over the last year. And I know that the virtual world, especially globally, has not been something brand new for you. I'd love to hear if you could just quickly share with the folks on the call who you are, what you do, what your organization is. And I'd love to hear for you what was personally worth paying attention to in the content or the conversations today.
Well, nice to see you all. My name is Steve Fitch. I am the founder and CEO of Eden Reforestation Projects, which is an international dual mission organization. We provide employment to about 26,000 villagers globally who produce, plant, and protect native species trees in forest restoration. This year we planted about 190 million so far, and all those people providing with employment is a lot of fun. Daniel, give me the follow. What do you want me to do now?
Yeah.
Rob,
what was worth paying attention to for you, either in the conversation you had or something that was shared in the content?
I think the biggest takeaway is being more effective in structuring the meetings. Zoom meetings can be just as bad as face-to-face. You can waste a lot of time, and we don't have a lot of time. So, yeah. And take a shower.
And take a shower.
Rob says we have to take showers.
Hopefully that order. Take a shower, then structure the meeting instead of structure the meeting and then take a shower.
Yeah, take a shower.
I love it. Awesome. Steve, thanks for jumping in with us quickly. As we wrap up, I want to point you all to a couple things as we continue to march through this half